Selling the war and propaganda. To influence public opinion in favor of the war, the U.S. produced films, commissioned colorful posters, and published pamphlets, and recruited everyday Americans to sell the war. These efforts helped create both modern American wartime propaganda and spurred the 20th century advertising industry. Another compelling way of promoting propaganda was visual arts. A famous example of this type of propaganda is James Montgomery Flagg's Uncle Sam Wants You. It was used to promote men volunteering in the military. Once the U.S. officially entered the conflict in 1917, President Woodrow Wilson and the government sought to unify American society behind the war effort. To achieve this, Wilson created the Committee on Public Information, an independent agency headed by former investigative journalist George Creel. Multiple media outlets tried to show the American people what to do and how to help with the war effort. During World War I, the United States engaged in extensive propaganda efforts to support its war objectives. Here are some facts. The CPI, established in 1917, was a government agency responsible for shaping public opinion in favor of the war. It utilized various forms of media to disseminate information and promote patriotism. Propaganda posters, iconic posters were created to evoke emotions and encourage support for the war. Images like Uncle Sam pointing with slogans such as "I want you" for the U.S. Army became powerful symbols. Propaganda aimed to create a negative perception of Germany, often portraying Germans as villains, which fueled anti-German sentiment among Americans. The U.S. government launched campaigns urging citizens to buy war bonds to fund the war effort. These campaigns often use emotional appeals and patriotic imagery to encourage financial support. Censorship. The government implemented censorship to control information and ensure that only messages supportive of the war were disseminated. This aimed to prevent dissent and maintain a unified front. Newspapers, magazines, and other media outlets played a crucial role in disseminating propaganda. Journalists were sometimes encouraged to write stories that supported the war effort. Propaganda depicted the enemy forces in dehumanizing ways, portraying them as brutal and inhumane. This was intended to bolster support for the war by framing the enemy as a threat to civilization. Propaganda emphasized the importance of patriotism and loyalty to the country. It sought to create a strong sense of national unity among Americans. These propaganda efforts played a significant role in shaping public opinion and garnering support for the U.S. involvement in World War I. During World War I, countries engaged in extensive propaganda campaigns to shape public opinion, boost morale, and garner support for their respective war efforts. Here are some facts about how countries utilized propaganda during this period. Recruitment propaganda. Governments created posters and media campaigns encouraging men to enlist in the military. Powerful slogans like "Your country needs you," which was mainly used in Britain, and iconic imagery were employed to evoke a sense of duty and patriotism. Propaganda often depicted the enemy in a negative light, often using dehumanizing images and stereotypes. This aimed to foster hatred and portray the enemy as a threat to national values. Countries promoted the sale of war bonds through propaganda, encouraging citizens to invest in government securities to finance the war. This was often coupled with messages of financial patriotism. The war bonds were also paid back with a certain amount of interest after a certain amount of years, which guaranteed the money back to the citizens. Propaganda targeted women, urging them to support by taking on new roles in the workforce while maintaining traditional family values. This helped address the labor shortage caused by the absence of men at the front. Exaggerated or false accounts of enemy atrocities were spread to invoke anger and hatred against the opposing forces. These stories aimed to justify the war and strengthen the resolve of the home front. Propaganda fueled a sense of nationalism and patriotism, emphasizing the righteousness of the cause. Flags, symbols, and anthems were used to unite the population behind a common identity. The war saw the use of new technologies in propaganda, including posters, newspapers, and even film, which was a new technology at the time. Governments recognized the power of visual imagery in shaping public sentiment. The era also witnessed the rise of silent films, which were used for propaganda purposes. These films often portrayed heroic deeds, vilified the enemy, and conveyed messages of sacrifice and bravery. After the war, there were efforts to revise the narrative through propaganda. Countries sought to control how the war was remembered, shaping historical accounts to align with their national interests. These facts highlight the multifaceted nature of propaganda during World War I, illustrating how various techniques were employed to influence public perception and garner support for the war. Thank you.